So welcome back. This is going to be a panel discussion with some of the speakers this morning. And many of you have submitted questions in advance, so thank you very much for doing that. And we'll work through as many of those questions as possible. And before I bring up the other panel members, I'm delighted to introduce to you Councillor Richard Roberts, who's leader of Hertfordshire County Council. Richard, welcome. So pleased you could join us today. And we're going to do sort of 10-15 minutes of me just asking Richard a few questions and pull out some of those before we then joined by the rest of the panel. So Richard, I'm going to start off with a question that before we get into policy and the intricacies of Hertfordshire and so on, what does nature mean to you?
Good start, isn't it? I grew up in the rural fringes, if you like, in Shropshire, and nature was whatever was on the doorstep. And as a teenager, I got into bird watching, and then I got into bird ringing. I got out of bird ringing by my 20s. I'd had enough of catching birds. I thought it was too intrusive. So apologies to all the bird ringers here. And when I went to university, I was the chairman of the Conservation Volunteers, and I really got stuck into some big projects, whether it was dry stone walling and scrub bashing and big projects up in the Lake District and in the Peak District as well. And then in about 94, I did a master's in environmental studies, which didn't sit all that well with my employment, which was in the oil industry, go all over the world, exploration, appraisal, and production. So full geological evaluation. But for me, I have retained that curiosity and interest and passion around our nature, our natural environment, the way people interact with it, the value of our natural world. And I think as we come out of COVID recovery, if you like, and we're not out of it yet, and I see a number of you are still wearing masks, and quite right so, that actually that interaction with our natural environment and how it links into our built environment is as important as it's ever been. And I have to say, I was phenomenally impressed with both your presentation, but the others we had today. And it was all about that interaction with our wilder, greener world.
It really was. And this phrase we heard a lot in all the presentations earlier, putting nature into recovery, nature's recovery. You know, what is Hertfordshire County Council's commitment to nature recovery?
Well, it's huge, and I think in a sense it's always been there. There's always been a really good working relationship between the County Council, the district councils, and of course the Wildlife Trust, and previously, it's now with the Wildlife Trust, the biological records being with the County Council. I think there's been, since the declaration of the climate emergency back in 2019, and our own commitment to 2030 around, and it's slightly less than the Wildlife Trust, or the governments for that matter, at 20% increase in biodiversity by 2030. But also nothing going to landfill, ideally by 2030, and decarbonising our own organisation, but of course influencing other organisations that we work with. And I think that's a really big agenda. But we now have, I'd like to thank Julie Greaves for all the work that she does, and then coming in as a director, for the first time, a director of sustainability, Lynn Seeney, and that, in a sense, is our commitment. It is with our people working with all the other organisations around the county to make the most difference that we can. And it was lovely to see the example of Wilder St Albans, and of course we want a Wilder Hitchin, or we want a Wilder Hemel, or we want, you know, it is ultimately a Wilder Hertfordshire. But that was a great example of, for example, the County Council through Highways working really closely with St Albans to make sure that we get the most possible biodiverse verges, and we're committed pounds, shillings and pence to do that.
Great. Yeah, very inspiring presentations there. What about your estate, the estate of the County Council itself? What's the role that can play, both in putting nature into recovery, but also helping tackle the climate crisis?
I think it's twofold, possibly threefold. One, our rural estate is farmed by tenant farmers. Our tenant farmers should be, I believe, farming to the highest stewardship standards, so that some of the things we're talking about on that slide, which were valid in 2008, which were probably valid in 1998 and 1988, which is about linking all of those valuable wildlife sites and nature reserves, our own estate can be a force for good, and has to be a force for good. So it isn't that we want to in any way, and you made this point as well in your speech, it isn't in any way that we want to undermine the productivity of farming. But actually, for that subsidy, please could you get some wildlife corridors in there that allow that biodiversity, that recovery to be enhanced. And then if we turn around and say, do you know, this is what we're doing with our estate, and I know there's some significant landowners here today, I would love us all to work together to join up and have best possible practice, not just in Hertfordshire, but in the country. You know, let's really go for it. We're in this, there's 1.3 million people live in Hertfordshire, so it's an incredible pressure on its landscape. Equally, that's 1.3 million people that need to benefit from a vibrant and dynamic landscape for health benefits. And if I just digress ever so slightly, when I became leader last year, I made 3 priorities, really important priorities: environment, sustainable development. Let's build our new communities to the highest possible standards. And also health and well-being. I think that's circular. If we've got a great environment, if we're connected, both digitally and physically, our health and well-being has the potential to improve. And I think that was very much writ large with the presentations we heard this morning. So those are real priorities that are now encased in our own corporate thinking, if you like.
Great. So thanks for that, Richard. And we did have a lot of questions come in for you ahead of this today. There's a lot of interest in the upcoming local nature recovery strategy. Can you give us some teasers? What will be in it?
So local nature, so we are committed to improving and enhancing the potential for nature recovery. The report by the Herts and Middlesex Wildlife Trust, as you know, shows just how much damage has been done in recent decades. That has to be reversed. It's interesting, whilst I'm talking to you, somebody's trying to ring me. I was just tempted to introduce them to you all. We have got to work collaboratively to figure out how we can do this. Currently, we think about 16% of the county has got a reasonable, a biodiverse environment. But if we want to get to 30%, that's an area about the size of Dacorum. We are going to have to work closely with our other political colleagues in the districts, in the parishes, our key landowners, and with our communities. Ultimately, and I think this is why the Wilder St Albans appeals to me so much, ultimately, communities have got to want this to happen. Individuals in communities have got to want this to happen. So whether it is green energy, whether it is solar panel, solar farms, which we can put on a rural estate, for example, whether it is tree planting, whether it is community gardens or orchards, it doesn't matter what it is. Whether we start connecting hedgerows and tree planting, we're committed to 1.3 million trees. We want to plant 1 tree for every person in Hertfordshire and 100 kilometres of hedgerows in the next sort of 8 or 10 years. So we are up for it. We are up for nature recovery. And I think but it is, and for this audience with the Trust promoting a wilder Hertfordshire, I think our work with the Trust is going to be essential, absolutely essential. So an essential partner in Hertfordshire.
Excellent, good. One of the questions I'm particularly interested in is how we can just speed up the pace and scale of all of this. And this is a question, I mean, every organisation in this field is wrestling with this. Ourselves at the Wildlife Trust, we're thinking, how can we move faster on this when it's such a crisis? And how can we take it to scale even faster? What's your thoughts on that?
I think we've got to galvanise across land ownership, the public and private sector. We are all committed And private sector is possibly even ahead of the public sector in this realm. They realise that if they wish to get to the highest standards of decarbonised and acceptable ethical working, which is driving investment at the moment, the supply chains all the way through have to link together. So I think there is a great opportunity, particularly with offsetting, but also with individual projects, with sponsorship, for projects to link in. We at the County Council and with District Council colleagues, and there are political colleagues from across the spectrum here today, and geographically across Hertfordshire as well. But I genuinely think that by bringing our resources together, and what the County Council is putting in is running into millions, but ultimately, if we are to decarbonise successfully, the sums involved are huge. So there is a challenge in meeting the 2030 commitments around decarbonisation, nature recovery, and all our other commitments. That is a real challenge. And because of what Russia has just gone and done in Ukraine, a balanced budget, and it will be the same for many organisations, a balanced budget we had in February is now shot to ribbons because of inflation and the incredible costs of disrupted supplies coming into the county. So we do face some significant challenges, but my commitment in this room today is that these priorities of the environment and sustainable development must not fall by the wayside as we obviously meet the need of the cost of living issues which are arising as we speak. And we have to recognise those. We will support the vulnerable. We will have a universal offer, but we've got to hang on to some of the really good things we're talking about today.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, things like energy efficiency, I would say, are absolutely the way which we deal with some of these challenges. And
energy efficiency in our schools, quietly, we're going to schools, some 250 now, and putting in meters. Simple, cost-effective, low-cost metering. Now, somebody might want to correct me here now, but we are heading towards a saving of 10,000 tonnes of carbon a year across the school network, the ones that we're responsible for relatively low sums of money invested. But just by thinking carefully about how you can be effective and efficient and then having the programmes that roll through, I think we can make a difference. It isn't always about spending a lot of money. Sometimes it is about the collective will to make it happen.
A couple of last questions for you, Richard, and I particularly like these. What species would you love to see return to the county?
Well, obviously I want to see more members of the Green Party and more Liberal Democrats, and more Labour. You know, they've been in decline for so long, and I'd like to see more of them. No, joking aside. Actually, the nightingale cannot be heard in Hertfordshire. Wouldn't it be great if they came back? We don't have a big enough insect population, the really big, splatty, fat ones that used to hit your windscreens 30 years ago. There's not enough in Hertfordshire. So how can we encourage a bigger insect population, which will then mean that we can support more swifts, more swallows, and more house martins, which are declining rapidly? I do love the idea of, can we go and steal Enfield's beavers? I think there must be somewhere we can go and put them in Hertfordshire. I do love the idea of that, but I don't think we want to be introducing the lynx or wolves when we've got 1.3 million people. So I think there is, let's link up our wildlife reserves, that 16,000 hectares that was talked about earlier. Let's link that up, improve it, enhance it, and then wildlife generally will come back and thrive. But I think for me, it would be the nightingale.
Okay, and big fat splatty insects.
A big fat splatty insect.
I like those. Good. Okay. And what action will you take personally to help achieve 30 by 30?
Personally, I'm very lucky. I live in the village of Sarrett. Some of you know that, and we've got a couple of fields that run down to the Chess. So as we speak, we're going to be putting in a fence at the bottom of the field. This is going to annoy all the dog walkers. And we're going to put a fence in, which would be about 10 metres back from the River Chess. That will allow safer grazing for the water voles, and that when they feed, particularly at night. And the only reason that I know that was because I asked Tim from the Wildlife Trust to come to and give us some advice, and he said that's what you need to do, and we're doing it. And we've obviously planted a few trees and let a few areas go a bit wild and scrubby, and yeah, there's a few more white throats and black caps around than there used to be.
Great, thank you very much, Richard. Let's just give Richard a round of applause. And now I want to invite the other panellists, to other speakers this afternoon to join us. So we had Nadia, Heidi, Chloe, and Howard, of course. Thank you very much.
Thank goodness you've actually got a panel of experts now.
So you'll have to share the mic up there, three of you. We'll work it out. We'll figure it out. I have to say thank you, all of you, for just really inspiring presentations there this afternoon. And so many people were saying that to me in the break, just how incredibly inspiring those presentations were. And they flowed really nicely, I think, from one to each other as well. So many questions came in, in advance. We had one, I think, particularly relevant for you, Nadia. We had questions about funders and about the support they can provide for community action. So the question is, what do you think are the key things that you and your group need to make a difference to wildlife in your area? And, if you had funders in the room, what would you say to them in particular about funding? It doesn't have to be just funding, but,
Right, yes, I'm glad it isn't just funding, because I think for what we do, what's more important is that people actually get involved. I think most of the things that we do don't cost a lot of money. The only thing I would say is that the leaflets do, so things like that, often that can mount up. But really, most of the things we do, letting your grass grow, swapping plants, this is something that anybody can do. And actually, I think that's really important, because we want to be inclusive. We want to feel that everybody can involved and everybody can contribute. It doesn't matter whether you have the money to spend or not. So I think in terms of funding, obviously a little bit would be nice, but that's not the key thing really. I would say to support our work, it's more about the council basically seeing that we are here and trying really hard to make these green corridors in our streets, and to kind of empower us to do that with things like, for example, incentives for homeowners to grow their grass long in the front, not pave over their front gardens, not cut down their trees, not use chemicals like slug pellets, which of course are terrible for hedgehogs, things like that. So incentives for homeowners not to do these things, but instead kind of join in with the rest of their neighbours. I think that would be really good. And then, of course, also, in the wider scheme of things, HCC, for example, lead by example and stop spraying our streets with glyphosate. I mean, I know there's about to be a really great scheme that's happening where 5 of our Wilderhood Watch streets are now not going to be sprayed with glyphosate. So we're going to use that as a project, basically launch and say, hey, our streets aren't going to be sprayed anymore. We're going to get teams together to do some weeding instead. And we're going to also say, so please could you not spray in your gardens either? Let's have a completely chemical-free street. So there's lots of practical things that actually I think our council, our district and HCC can do to help Wilderhood Watch.
Great, fantastic. And Heidi, in your work with, several community groups, what is it you find comes out time and again, the fundamental things that are needed to help community groups such as Nadia's get going?
I think it is an absolute range. I don't just think there's just one thing that comes up time and time again. Lots of people want to know what to do, what's the right thing to do in a certain place, because I think there's quite a lot of messaging around about with people wanting to do the right thing, but actually meaning well, they haven't necessarily done the right thing with respect to perhaps planting trees on an area of quality grassland or that sort of thing. So I think, it's having the right information to make the best decisions for the biggest impact. But a range of things, you know, there's some people who want the space to be able to take action. So, you know, have opportunities locally where they can join other groups and get involved with things that are happening, so they feel that they're kind of making an impact in that way. So yeah, it's a broad range. Yeah, lots of different needs.
Great, good. I do know we've got some funders in the audience, so I'm not surprised that there's some questions here that definitely, I think, must have been submitted by them. And the next one I'd put to both Howard and Chloe, because it's a question. It says, how do you think funding bodies could better support your longer term ambitions for nature's recovery?
Shall I go first? It's so disconcerting hearing your voice at this level. Yeah, I think it's amazing that the range of funding opportunities that are out there, but often they don't quite recognise the time it takes to invest in the people to then develop the relationships to then instigate the nature recovery schemes and things like that. These things always take time. And often we have kind of year-long projects or 3-year-long projects, and that isn't really enough to keep a consistency of person in post to deliver those things and to build up the trust and relationship with landowners, farmers, anyone who can make a difference. So I think, yeah, some looser funding opportunities that aren't so short-lived time-wise. We are starting to see things with like landscape recovery coming out of government now, which are proper, you know, sort of 10-year plus schemes, which is really encouraging. But more of that, definitely. And also recognising a little bit more that sometimes the outcomes that we're after might not tick the sort of boxes that we often find with some funding schemes. Sometimes we're not quite sure what's going to happen. We can't put a number on it. We can't necessarily report something specific or know what we're going to report at the end of a project, particularly when we're thinking about more innovative approaches like wilding. You know, that's who knows what's going to happen when you leave something or put mixed grazing on a site. You just don't know. So yeah, those would be my ones.
Yeah, it's very much, if you're handing control over to nature, then nature's in charge, yeah. Howard?
From the golfing perspective, quite often actually golf courses are actually exempt from a lot of these stuff, from a lot of these funds. So we've just got some money, we've just planted 500 metres of hedgerow from the Farming and Protected Landscapes Fund from Chiltern Conservation Board, and that's been fantastic for us. And we're hopefully working with them, hopefully, on the grazing project as well. So, but we're in a fairly unique position in most golf courses because we have a HLS, a high level stewardship scheme on our non-golfing land that allows us kind of access to those pots of money, whereas a lot of golf courses don't. And I think that probably some of that comes down to a PR image, I think, of golf over the last, over the decades. And therefore golf tends to be seen as, a profit making or a commercial organisation, therefore isn't accessible to this, or they're seen as some of the problem as well. So I think going back to actually having golf involved in that conversation would be useful, and I think that goes down to a governing body level of England Golf and the Greenkeeping Association, etc., to be involved in those conversations would be great. And I think the other bit as well would be, coming back to other points, was that sometimes golf clubs just want to know what to do and don't know where to start. And I think that would be the thing for the fund, is to actually help them, just to educate them more than anything.
And to share learning, I guess, as well, between different golf courses across the country, I guess, in this. Yeah,
absolutely. And the thing with golf clubs is that usually it's run fairly tight ship. So actually the volunteers within golf clubs are probably usually the better inroad into that, rather than the people running golf clubs, because they're having to worry about so many other things as well. And sadly, not for every club sustainability is such a high priority. So yeah, I would actually suggest going through volunteers would be a better way of getting, and understanding that conversation.
Great, thank you. So another question that's come in is really just highlighting the issues we've all been talking about this afternoon, the very sort of significant development pressures that there are in this kind of part of the world, busy road network and so on, and the problems that can cause for wildlife. And the real point is, what's the proactive action we can take to better protect the habitats and species we have, but also to make more space for nature in the future that's properly connected. We've heard about some of this afternoon in the presentations, of course, but you know, if we're going to be really proactive and get ahead of these problems and stop this, repeat the problems from the past, how do we do that? Richard?
So I think not only have we got 1.3, we've got 1.25 million people in Hertfordshire, and that's been growing at probably 80 to 100,000 people per decade. It's quite phenomenal. And of course, the number of dwellings and communities have expanded as well. I think it's all of our responsibility to ensure that we have the highest quality of development on what is a very, very special place. We are between London, the Green stops at London, a Green starts in Hertfordshire, and it's the first, and we have a responsibility, socioeconomic responsibility. We're a really important economy for the country. So we have an economy that's got to be maintained, we have our residents who need to be thriving, we need our environment to be as protected or enhanced as it can be. So through the Hertfordshire Infrastructure Development Board, councillors, district and county organisations working with developers to secure the highest possible standards, which includes, at the very least, 10%, probably more, of biodiversity enhancement with our communities, but also building in the kind of digital networks, but also the physical networks, the pathways, the cycleways that connect to the next town or the next village. So you don't need to get in your car, that we design in the charging points for the cars, not retrofit them, that the houses don't need retrofitting and adapting for climate change. They're already ready for the next 30, 40, 50 years. And I think the more we do of that, the more effective and efficient we'll become at it. The standards will be accepted by communities because they will be brilliant. People will want to live there. And I think that's what we must do. We must drive the standard. I think that is one of our, currently, I think that's, as we look at building 100,000 houses over the next 15 years, I think that's one of our really big challenges in the county, and it's got to be done properly.
Thank you. Chloe, what about that? Do you think, you know, if we take that kind of proactive action, is it possible to actually bring wildlife back as we build new houses?
Yeah, I think if it, you know, it's a huge opportunity with Biodiversity Net Gain, and I know here in Hertfordshire and Middlesex, we've been working with the County Council to try and make that happen ahead of the game. You know, we're trying to get in place what we need so that, yeah, development isn't such a negative impact on the county. And hopefully with local nature recovery strategies, there's going to be an incentive, you know, for developers to divert their investment into the proper areas that are flagged within that process. There'll be a financial incentive for doing that. So that's how we can get the best out of net gain. I think it's a huge opportunity. I think we're on it in Hertfordshire and Middlesex, which is really encouraging to be collaborating in such a positive way around it. I had something else to say, but I can't remember what it was.
It will come to you, Chloe.
It'll come, yeah.
In the meantime, Howard, a question that came in for you, and it's one of those what one thing questions, I'm afraid, which I always dread, actually. But what one thing do you think would make the difference and enable landowners and managers like yourself to manage their land to benefit wildlife and contribute to the target of 30 by 30?
If there's an undiplomatic answer, it would be change the legislation to force people to do it. I think for us, what we're living in, and you know, and most businesses are, you're living in a world where you've got to improve your efficiency somehow, and therefore it's taking an overview of your business. I mean, we're dealing in the golf industry with a huge legislation changes around pesticides. And therefore, there are now no insecticides at all available for for golf, or in fact any amenity turf. There are very, very few herbicides. There are very, very few fungicides. So golf is having to go back to the basics of actually the right species performing what they want them to do, rather than make inadequate species for that habitat fit and do what you want it to do by putting lots of inputs in. So with the cost of sales increase and you know the inflation costs we're bearing, with ever increasing standards of expectations, we're having to be more efficient. So from my perspective, it's often doing less is far better for nature, and we find that definitely on our golf course. We stop cutting an area and up pops heather and gorse. So actually it's about trying to keep the playability of the golf course, but doing less is often the benefit. And therefore I look at it from a marginal gains of every square metre of grass I don't have to cut is time, man, you know, labour inputs, it's diesel, it's upkeep of that machine, etc., etc. So I think it's taking that pragmatic approach to things and saying, how can I run my business differently in a more efficient way, but less money and less inputs, but actually that will probably have a far better benefit for nature. So that's me, probably.
Good, great. Thank you very much. And then a question which I think is probably come to both Heidi and Richard on this one. Inspiring children about wildlife is clearly very important. What more could be done towards this, and what are the barriers to making it happen?
Yeah, so clearly inspiring children is very, very important. Not only to connect children to the natural world, but also, you know, the benefits of taking children outside in a learning environment, in a learning setting has been well documented, is really beneficial for young people in a way of bringing learning to life, making learning relevant, and also it can support some children who perhaps struggle more in a classroom environment when they're taken outside. So sort of from an environmental education point of view, you know, it's a no-brainer really to try and support more. I suppose one of the biggest barriers, you know, for us across Herts and Middlesex is that we have, correct me if I'm wrong, is it sort of over 600 schools? Well, certainly with Middlesex as well. So clearly, you know, we as officers are limited in kind of our reach and how many young people we can work with. So I really think, and certainly it's an approach that we've been taking with the Wilder St Albans project, is how can we support teachers to do more? So working with teachers to build their confidence, give them the resources they need, support them in improving their school grounds for learning as well. And actually really, you know, there is no better person placed to teach a child than their teacher, because they fully understand their needs and how to differentiate their learning. So I think really it's about putting our efforts into supporting teachers to do more and helping them to get outside the classroom more.
Great, thank you. Richard?
Yeah, I think we have to inspire our children to be curious and passionate about the world that they live in. And that obviously means how they interact with their broader environment, whether it, you know, that natural and built, and the two absolutely have to interact. I think we also have to recognise that we have an element of unhealthy living, which is leading to overweight and in some cases obesity, and it starts in childhood. And so again, whether it's the Daily Mile or whether it's ultimately ending up at the park run, or whether it is through forest schools, or however the education takes place, that expending of energy, getting out and away from the home, away from the screen, away from the television, and starting to create a curiosity about that wider world out there, I think is so important for young people, and I think I support the answer that was given here. Yeah, thank you.
Great. And in case you haven't heard, I'm sure many of you have, but of course the government has now committed to a natural history GCSE, which we're very excited about. There's Wildlife Trust, we were very much involved in some of the development thinking behind that, and working with the government Department of Education in scoping out what it could look like, and we'll continue to be involved in trying to develop that natural history GCSE, which they've committed to run, I think, in 2025. And we're also giving some early thought now about what we can do to help prepare teachers for that. Well, Heidi didn't know that, but you said exactly the right thing there, Heidi. It's fantastic. So look, a final really question from me to all of you, because I think these have been a great set of presentations from you all this afternoon, and they kind of really worked well together. I'd love to ask each of you, what's your big take home from this afternoon and hearing the other presentations and hearing the conversation? What do you think you'll do going home tonight and thinking, oh, that was interesting, or that was new to me, or that was a surprise? Richard, start with you.
For me, it's the positivity. I think we are genuinely all starting to understand that we don't just recognise decline, but we are actively engaging in reversing those trends, that we recognise the value both economically but socially, health-wise, that by doing something together, we're going to make a difference in Hertfordshire. And what I've heard today is we're already doing that. And so let's just keep doing it. We might need to do more, but with this kind of audience, and we've got more people here than your average conference, this is something people want to hear about. The priorities I decided upon to encourage the County Council through my leadership, I think a year on, I reflect on those, and I think they are more of the zeitgeist and more important and getting more important, and I take that away from this conference as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Howard?
I think mine is how, coming back from the wilder St Albans things, how my golf course and my land sits within the community of Berkhamsted, I think, as well. And therefore, actually, the positive impact that we could have within Berkhamsted, and how we should actually be working far closer with the residents of Berkhamsted and to help to connect up those pieces of land. So I think that's my takeaway.
Great, thank you. Chloe?
Yeah, very similar. I think particularly the Wilderhood Watch stuff is incredibly inspiring, that, we can all go back into our communities and take action. There's nothing that is too small. Everything will benefit nature. Everything will benefit us. And, we should really celebrate that. We should encourage people to take action. And, it's just a fantastic model that you can see working anywhere that it's taken. Very powerful.
Really is, very inspiring. Heidi?
So I'm going to say more of the same. I think just that, we're in it together, basically, and we've all got a part to play, and there is something that we can all do, and we need to basically have Wilderhood Watch all over the place, really. I think that's the answer.
In every street. In every street. Absolutely. And Nadia?
Well, thank you, Heidi. Well, first of all, I think what I take away from this is that is something really, really positive, that we're actually all in agreement. Everyone wants the same thing. So I think now it's just recognising the urgency of it. And I think what you said, Chloe, at the very end of your presentation, when you said, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, I thought, yes, that's it. Because I think a lot of what holds us back is fear. And we think we don't know enough. And I'd just like to say, I know so little. When I started Wilderhood Watch, I knew even less, but I was so angry about those trees, and I just thought, I don't care that I know nothing. Somebody else can tell me about it. I just need to do something now. So I think it's very much, don't let perfection get in the way. There's so much paperwork sometimes that you have to go through to get anything done. So I would just say to any councillors here, if you can, slash the paperwork. We don't have time. Just even if it's not done properly, just do it. That's what I'd say.
Great. Well, I have to say a huge thank you to all of you that submitted those questions in advance. And sometimes we mashed some of your questions together to get through as many of them as possible. I hope those of you that did spotted your questions in there. So thank you very much for that. And let's please give a really big thank you to Richard, to Howard, to Chloe, to Heidi, and to Nadia for our speakers this afternoon. Thank you.